Okay, greetings. I want to begin this, first of all, by saying it is my great honor to be sitting in this chair. Technically, it's a stool that I'm sitting on, which you will hear creak from time to time. It is my honor to be telling this story, and fortunately, in my opinion anyway, it's more than just a story. This is an experience that I had that I documented every possible way I could so that there would become the possibility, would come that I could tell it to people, to the people, and hopefully, if nothing else, it brings comfort. It, hopefully, if nothing else, opens up the imagination to consider the impossible being completely possible. And I hope it also opens up the channels of the heart that connects us to our families and our loved ones, whether perfect, imperfect. But our ancestors paved the way for us to be where we are right now, and I feel it is my duty to pay homage to my ancestors, my grandparents especially, because as this project unfolded, it became evident to me everything that they've sacrificed or went through in their life to create someone down the line like myself who could look back over the years and over their experiences and see what led to today for me to be able to be here telling this story. I used to think my family was just banal, unremarkable, a family of people who just seem lost all the time, lost. The men seem lost, the women seem lost, and then trauma struck again and again and wiped out most of the men in my the generation older than me. And that happened to me specifically. My father was killed in a very freak, tragic accident that was questionable, and I was only a year and a half old. My other sisters were not much older, and it was something that we carried our whole life. Grief was always shadowing our steps, and I've lost a sister since those days, and I see how it all affected her. So it is a very sobering experience to view her life and what she went through and the outcome of it and the results of it and how heavy the burden was for her, let alone my other sister and myself. So I've always been someone who has thought about the past. I've always thought about family. I've always cared for my sisters deeply. They form my identity, even to this moment. I can't think of myself without thinking of myself in conjunction with my sisters. And I think about my father's death and have thought about it my whole life, and I am now 48 years old. When I was 6 years old, I stumbled upon some gospel music one night. I remember it vividly. I was sitting on the floor of my mother's bedroom, and she was away. We were living with my grandmother at the time, and I had 2 cousins and 2 sisters, and they were all watching TV in the next room. But I just was bored of TV. I've never been the type to watch a lot of TV, so I snuck off into my mother's room and started listening to music. And something about one of the songs I chose opened up some sort of understanding in my heart and in my mind of what I actually was dealing with as a 6-year-old little girl. The song was somber and talked about death, and then I started to realize I had been carrying death with me my entire childhood. And I cried no shortage of tears, but it all of a sudden gave me an awareness that I have a father, I had a father, and I started to build up my idea and concept of what he was at that time. It's something to do with the music affecting me, caused me to consider him, and it started to bring comfort to me. And as I recall, prior to that, it was only music that would soothe me when I was little. Younger than 6, I would have these crying spells where I would cry and cry. One time, I remember it lasted several days, and one of the few things my mother could do to get me to calm down was to play music. Just lay me down somewhere and I had a little wind-up music box, and she would wind it, and I would set it on my chest, and it would settle down that feeling of grief and pain that a child carries but cannot express, you know? It's there nevertheless, just like a weight. And so music was always that thing. And this experience when I was 6 years old opened up that channel of comfort for me in a way that grew over time and became a lifeline to me. And perhaps sadly also became something that I learned to escape to. And I started isolating myself with music at that age of 6. And from that age onward to today, very rarely do you see me without headphones on. And it's caused me to be somewhat solitary because I'd rather be listening to music and feeling that sense of comfort that I find in music rather than associating with people who do a lot of chatter, a lot of small talk, or a lot of din, noise. I like to have something to slip into in terms of a story or a narrative that makes me feel like I can manage this heavy, heavy, heavy burden that trails me, and that burden is grief from my father. So those habits carried me through most every day of my life. It always brought me a sense of closeness to my father, and rarely did I have times where I didn't feel close to him. But I did go through phases where I would get angry at him and not want to think about him. And then there were other times where I would be under intense stress and I could feel his presence next to me in the car, outside. One time in particular, I was having a heated argument with someone and I felt a hand rest on the back of my head, so much as to say, just settle down, it's okay. It was a comfort, and it was very real. And I had things like this going on. So I've always had my mind open to the spirit realm and to the concept of our loved ones not ceasing to exist, even if their physical form is not in the same realm as my physical form. I've always had the ability to think on those terms because it's the only hope I've ever had since I was a little girl and lost my father. It is the only hope I've ever had to see him again, is to dream up the concept of him still being around out there somewhere. So that's where the foundation of this whole story begins, and that is maybe why I find myself being the one who's able to tell it. I don't know if anyone else experienced anything like this during this time frame that I'm going to speak about, but I know I experienced it, and I feel like it is a great pleasure, honor, as I've said, and it is my gift to the people who have survived the residential school system in Canada specifically, and anyone abroad who might find comfort in this story. This is my gift for you. This is not for profit. This is an experience that was given to me, and I feel it is my duty to share this message with people who are destined to hear it and what it could all possibly imply about the things that we know and do not know about this world. So we're going to fast forward to the year 2020, and actually a little bit prior to that, but I will set the stage. I was married at the time. Things were not going well in my family, and without going into details, let's just say that things just escalated until we hit a breaking point, and we definitely broke. And that was a personal thing, but as an artist, by which I am an artist, and I've been one for a while now, I am a visual artist, and I've started learning to make sound compositions and things like that since this project began. But primarily, I'm a visual artist, and so I was in my studio practicing. And I don't know if anyone else remembers this, but I've spoken to a few people who do acknowledge they felt something shifted. But I started to feel some sort of intense energy on the winds in 2019. And this feeling amplified like a little more every single day. And unfortunately, the effect it was having on me, it was like it was pulling me into a state of inertia. I stopped going out. I stopped feeling like I was a part of the world. I was drifting and drifting and drifting and drifting off into my own little world as an artist, as a painter. And the thing that was going on in my community, right up the street from where I was living, was the dismantling of an 1800s Gothic cathedral, which was one of the main structures of the city I was living in St. John, New Brunswick, Canada, at the time. I was living right on the corner of Princess Street and Pitt Street, and had been living there for over a year with my family. And it's an old apartment. It was an old apartment. It's been renovated since then. Big building, old architecture, gorgeous. But maybe it was haunted. I have no idea. But something about that place and the folks that were living underneath us, we all felt something happen in 2019 that was coinciding with the dismantling of this Gothic cathedral, which was huge. And for some reason, I just felt inclined to document this cathedral. I have pictures of it before it was torn down. I have pictures of it during its dismantling. And I have pictures of it when it is in complete rubble. And I've done paintings of this process, and it was in that time frame that everything went crazy, and in my opinion, all hell literally seemed to break loose in my life. So I kept getting a heavier and heavier and heavier feeling in conjunction with the dismantling of this church. And originally it was bothering me that our modern construction companies were tearing it apart piece by piece. And it reminded me of when a whale is beached on the shore and it passes away, and they have to do something to bring it down to size so they can remove its parts. So sometimes they do some pretty horrid things to the body of a whale to remove it from the beach. I won't go into gory details, but this dismantling of this demolition of this cathedral reminded me of that process, and it was so irreverent, it was so brutal, and everywhere I looked when I went up to study the debris, I saw symbology of womanhood. The shapes of the Gothic arches is representational of the female birth canal, or the birth canal. Of course, it's female. But, you know, and then, it was like this just desecration of this building. And it isn't even so much that it was a religious building, but what really grieved me is the craftsmanship that went into it and how it was being torn to pieces. And it just seemed so wrong. So I thought that was what was pulling me into it, and that was my angle at first. And then I started to really feel something pick up in the spirit realm. And all of a sudden, I felt like I was stepping into a different world every time I sat down to do a painting of this cathedral. And as an artist, there are times when I create really focused, intentional paintings, and there's other times where I let my intuition go wild and I just paint what feels right to paint. Typically, I do the first before I do the second style, because the second one is always very messy, and I'm not comfortable making too much of a mess, because most of the places I've stayed in, I rent, right? So I think about these things. But when I'm able to let myself just embrace this freedom that I feel, and my intuition takes over, I start to create images that are completely different than the ones where I fine-tune my vision and create something tangible like a flower. So, but in this situation, I was really picking up on something, and so I just started letting my intuition kick in, and I started to just follow that, let the paint do what it wants, let it go where it wants, let it say what it wants. And as I did that, I started painting this cathedral. All of a sudden, I started to see and hear images of children. It's like they were rising up out of the earth. And this was in 2019, and it is well documented. And I do remember trying to discuss this with people around me, but of course, a story like this, nobody wants to necessarily hear it until they're ready to hear it. And there might be some that are never ready to hear something like this, so it's a very difficult thing to impart to the wrong people. But hopefully the right people will hear it now. But while I was doing these paintings, I kept seeing these children rising up out of the soil. And I used several different mediums and several different times it was like there was children rising up out of the soil, rising up out of the soil, rising up out of the soil. And this started amping up, and I, according to my loved ones, went into some sort of manic state, they claim. There was some title for it that I can't quite remember. I've had people tell me there was drugs involved that were given to me that I was unaware of. I honestly do not know exactly what caused it to hit a fever pitch, but it hit a fever pitch where I felt the spiritual energy coming through me at an amped up level that went on for 3 solid days and nights. And when the kickoff point to this was like I all of a sudden was tapped into some sort of realm where I could hear a heartbeat. And I could hear drumming, 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 drumming. And then I started to feel an inclination to start listening to this song. It's like a voice was saying, listen to this song, now this song, now this song, now this song. And I heard it so clear and it was so strong, and so I started to do that. And luckily I had someone on the other side of all of this who was also witnessing this event unfold, and thankfully they had the wherewithal to document this in their own way, and I can refer you to that information if you want it. Like, maybe I'll make it available. But anyway, I'm not the only one who experienced this, but it's very difficult to convey, and he's also had a hard time getting people to believe or understand his conveyance of this information. But we can corroborate this story, because all of a sudden these songs started to stack up, one on top of the other, on top of the other, and it wasn't about genre. In fact, it was music from several, dozens of genres before this all has been said and done. And themes, subjects, none of that mattered. What seemed to matter was there was something within the rhythm of certain songs that whatever was pulling me into this information was showing me what's actually exists, what's going on beneath the surface, sort of a thing. It sort of reminds me of like some sort of concept where 1 minute you're up and the next minute you're down. Like if you're sticking your head underwater and you can see what's going on in the spirit realm when your head's underwater, and then you come back for air up to regular earth and back and forth, back and forth. So this information was coming to me. I would kind of go down into it, get sunk into it, play the songs that I was told to play, and then all of a sudden this heartbeat rhythm started to emerge from all the songs. And the heartbeat rhythm actually transpired to be a drumming, 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 drumming. And the shock of it really set my heart just like started. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. My whole body was feeling this. And I was hearing it, and someone else was also hearing it, and it was something that was traceable and understandable. It's not like I was having a drug trip and I saw something that's off in the ether. This was all happening with, feet on the ground, headphones on, playing these songs, and having a friend observing the songs I was playing to back up the story. So I stuck with it, and I did not know what was going on. It scared me, and unfortunately, it's the exact same time frame that COVID hit, and it's within that time frame that the whole city shut down, and the whole world shut down, and it was like the whole world just fell into a hush, and all of a sudden, the spirit realm was on the move, and I had visions of things that were going on in the spirit realm that scared me deeply, deeply. But I also found it incredibly inspiring. And all of that information has its own place in this story. But if I dive into that, this story is going to end up being hours and hours long. So I'm going to try to concise it. But it is a vast amount of information. It is a vast experience. I remember 90% of it. And it's been going, it started in 2019. And it is just in 2026 that I finally feel like I can pull this all together in a way that's tangible enough to share it with the world. Although I have been sharing bits and pieces of it as often as I can in whatever creative format I can figure out, and so I'll explain more of that later. But I went through this, and so this all went on, and it shocked me so bad I didn't know what I was supposed to do. My family noticed I was acting very strange, and they reacted negatively, of course. And unfortunately, we also had to move in that time frame, and we ended up living from going to this city where all this was going on to moving back to a house that I call the Purple House, where my family and I lived for years on end. And I painted it purple, and the significance of that color was the fact that it was part of the Underground Railroad. So, as far as I understand it, it's got secret chambers, secret basements, and connections to the brook nearby. And so that's also another aspect of this story that I won't get into if I can, but it's just part of it. But the main thing is, by the time we hit the Purple House, it was a abrupt move. It was right on the cusp of COVID, and we were back then, at that time, all in a panic. I was terrified. It scared me so bad. I vomited several times. Anytime news came to me, I was already so on edge. If anything disrupted me on any level, I would get nauseous and throw up. I was feeling this so viscerally. My whole body was just being commandeered, it seemed like. It seemed like something was coming over me and it was controlling me, and I was no longer in control of it. I just had to go with it, or else suffer the consequences of being absolutely exhausted. It was like I was in a current, and it was either if you swim upstream or downstream, but either way you're going. So you pick the one that's easier to manage, and it was easier for me to manage to fall into this than to fight it. And everyone was distancing themselves from me at this point, because no matter how I tried to explain it to the people around me, nobody wanted to hear it. And that never made sense to me until one time my mother said something like a scripture out of the Bible says that a prophet is never accepted in their own country. I'm not necessarily deeming myself a prophet, but what that does suggest is that if you have a gift, it's not necessarily something that people close to you want to deal with. and I guess that's just the way it is, but it made it incredibly difficult for me. So by the time we got to the Purple House, we had to start over again, move, unpack, figure out this, figure out that. My kids were ripped away from their schools. My now ex-husband quit his job, and I lost my art studio, and I didn't know if I was going to make it. I didn't know what we were going to do. It was really, really intense. But I stuck with it, with the music thing, because I also, at that time, stumbled on the fact that I am able to not necessarily read people's thoughts, but I can hear like if somebody's thinking about something, I get the general impression of it. And at the time, those general impressions weren't so good coming from my family, and so I started to isolate myself even further, because I didn't know what to do about that, and I knew that things were so bad there was no room to confront any of that in any way that would have been plausible or peaceful. So again, isolated myself. So I just dove into all this music, and I, in total, ended up listening to 4,000 hours of songs, like 4 months back to back, no break in terms of the time frame. Like I did not come up for air, And luckily, it was the COVID era had hit, and nobody was doing anything. Everyone was just supposed to stay home. So the timing was perfect, and it's just almost like it was so meant to be, because there was nothing else that I could do. There was nothing else that was available to do, and I couldn't go to work. I couldn't paint. I couldn't do anything other than this whole thing. And so I dove into it. I walked and walked and walked and walked and listened and listened and listened and listened. And I just kept going. And then there came a point where it started to seem to me like I was surrounded in the spirit world by a vast sea of children. Every time I closed my eyes, I could just see children. So many, many children. I could not make an ounce of sense of why am I seeing this? Why am I feeling this? But it lingered. It did not go away. And it kept getting more intense and more intense. And if you know anything about the paranormal, you know that if something like that is attaching itself to you, it sucks your energy. You know, and that's what it felt like. And I just was weak. I had days where I could barely walk. When this first kicked off, I ended up laying on the floor, and I could not find the strength to get up, and that was frightening to me, but nobody else seemed to think that was anything to be alarmed about, so I just kept pushing through it, finding the strength to just put one foot in front of the other. I was no good to anybody else. But this just kept getting more intense and more intense and more, and it went on and on and on for days, maybe weeks, maybe months. I really can't remember. But I just knew enough to know to stick with it, because on the heels of all this, I was also doing research where I was trying to unearth the effectiveness or the authority of what I call the Elliot curse, which is a real curse put on the Elliot clan and other border clans in Scotland back in the 1500s, I think it was, or maybe way earlier. I'm not sure the exact date right now, but anyway, based on all the tragedy my family had experienced over the years and all the different things that have happened to us that were just outside the ordinary, I was already on the job of trying to figure out where that was all coming from and what could I do about it, because I was scared it was going to affect my children. And my sister gave a bit of a word of wisdom before she passed away, and she said that my children were going to be the ones to break the family curse. And she said that to me sort of out of the blue, off the cuff, and we never talked about it again. But before she died, she did not know that our family literally had a curse. Elliot is my grandmother's maiden name, so, I named my son, his middle name is Elliot, and, it's a name I wear with pride, because I just adored my grandmother for all her faults and all her goodness to me. She was a beyond average, amazing person, So this was something that's always kind of just stuck in my mind, like, what is this? Who has the right to do this to people? Because of all the implications of it. So I was already on the trail of trying to figure out what my heritage was, where we fit in as a family, what was going on with us in our ancestry that might provoke all this trauma, all this darkness that was following us again and again and again, year in and year out. It was just something beyond normal, I always believed. So I stumbled upon this curse and was doing my best to figure out how to grapple with all of that information. And it's called the Elliot curse, and you can look it up. It's online. It's horrendous, in my opinion. So, again, another branch of this story. So there's 4 different branches on top of this main theme. And here we are, 27 minutes, and I'm still talking, and I'm just skimming the surface. So please bear with me. I feel it'll be worth it if you stick with this to the end. So I was feeling a disturbance in the spirit realm, and then I started to close my mind, and I would have vision after vision after vision of different things. And I kept seeing all these children, and I did not know what that was all about. I had no idea. Well, circumstances unfolded, and I ended up moving back to the city where they tore down the cathedral, St. John, New Brunswick, with my youngest kids so they could finish school. And so in that time frame, things had gotten a little bit less intense for me, but I was still feeling this intense pressure, like still there's a piece of the puzzle that had not yet fallen into place. And I kept seeing children and feeling children and doing my best to be as good of a mother as I could be under those conditions, which in hindsight was probably not that good, but I was trying to deal with the fact that my marriage had come to an end and all those things. But when it comes to this project, I just kept sifting through information and songs and trying to figure out, like, something's missing, like something is calling to something. I just hear something. I feel something in the music, on the winds, in the spirit realm, in this real physical realm, is feeling it in my body. And I kept sifting through music and song after song after song and just trying to overturn every stone I could think of. And interesting to know, or I'd like you to know, that the Purple House, for example, was located right along the Woolastook River. I myself grew up along the Woolastook River, and the river seemed to be something that's always in the background of my life. And that particular river empties out into the Bay of Fundy in St. John, New Brunswick. So all these things tie together, but the main vein that connects everything is the St. John River, the Woolastook River. So keep that in mind as I tell this story. So one night I was stumbling through information having to do with the province of New Brunswick. And somewhere along the line I stumbled across the name Jeremy Dutcher. And Jeremy Dutcher sings music in the language of the Woolastook Way people, the traditional 12,000-year-old language. And that's one thing. And that caught my attention because of the drumming. I had sussed out the fact that something to do with the drumming. And so I knew there's something to do with our indigenous people. Like the connection was obvious to me because of this drumming that I kept hearing, drumming. I kept feeling drawn to the rhythm of a drum over and over. So when I stumbled upon his name, I remember it very clearly. I just decided to search his name and see like what's going on, because I knew a little bit about him, but not that much. And then all of a sudden I saw his album cover where he's sitting in front of an old record player or whatever they're called, I'm not sure. But it says a noise device. It's projecting noise back at him. And from what I understand, he's listening to wax scrolls that actually have recordings of our indigenous people from way, way back, singing traditional songs and in their traditional language. And Jeremy Dutcher is indigenous himself, and so he's trying to revitalize this Wolastoqey language through his work. And so all of a sudden one dot started to connect, and then the other connected, and the other connected, and the other connected, and then all of a sudden I realized like something's going on here. Because I started to watch his music on YouTube, and I saw he was screaming into the piano that he was playing. Or not screaming, but yelling, like he was using his loud, beautiful singing voice and calling down into the piano as if he's calling down to the music itself, speaking through it. And I thought, well, there you go. If Jeremy Dutcher understands that you can communicate with the spirit realm by screaming into the piano, then I cannot be too far off base thinking that I can hear something going on in the spirit realm calling to me through music. So I started to listen to his music, a little bit here and a little bit there, and then all of a sudden, the vision of these children came to me more prevalently, and then all of a sudden it was like one just kind of walked on to wherever he was supposed to go. And then all of a sudden another one walked on, and another one walked on. And I realized the more I was playing Jeremy Dutcher's music, the more this pressure was relieving itself from me. And I was starting to feel a little bit lighter and a little bit lighter, and I started to realize I'm onto something. So to err on the side of caution, I took a speaker down to the Wolastoqey River, where it empties out into the Bay of Fundy, which is known to be the traditional grounds of the Wolastoqey people for the last 12,000 years. I mean, not the last 12,000, but that is the traditional lands of our indigenous people. So I went down to the exact location of where the Bay of Fundy meets the Wolastoqey River, and I started to play Jeremy Dutcher's music. Because it was in my mind to think, like, what these children need is to be led back home. They need to go home. And so I started to do that, and I started to feel this pressure relieve again and again. And then within weeks of that event, coinciding together, they started to find the unmarked graves of the residential school children in Canada. And I was stunned. I was stunned because when that story broke, it started to be all about the numbers. First it was 200 children, then it was 500 children, then 600, 700, on up to thousands, I think 10,000, maybe more. And then I got thinking, that's what I was seeing. I was seeing a sea of children, a sea of little children, mostly with dark hair, not all, but of children lost out in the spirit realm, wandering, not knowing where they're supposed to go, not knowing what home is, not knowing anything about what to do to find their way back home. And if you stop and think about the implications of the residential schools, these children were tortured if they clung to their culture on any level, including language, nutrition, anything of comfort, songs, their families. They were ripped away from all of that, thrown into these residential schools and tortured and abused in horrific ways if they presented any particular item that represented their culture. And so they were no longer allowed to speak their own language, and they had to speak English and be at the mercy of these priests and nuns who were abusing them and starving them and who had ripped them from their families as if they had something better to offer than their own families could provide for them. And so that has its own horrific bent to it, that all of that. I could talk about it for a while, but again, another branch of the story, and I want to try to keep it as simple as possible, because I know the people who care about this already know what happened and already know how horrific it was. But in a practical sense, as a mother, thinking, okay, this is what I'm thinking. These children are lost. They're lost out in the spirit realm, and all I can see is a sea of children swathed in a sea of black darkness. They do not see light anywhere. They look, and they are wandering, and they are scared, and they are lost. For some reason, maybe it's because I learned how to communicate with the dead when I was 6 years old, or maybe it's something else about me. Maybe it's my heritage, which I will get into at some point, or maybe I don't know what it is. I don't know why I have this going on with me, but I got thinking. Put all the doubt aside, put all the misgivings aside, and dive into this and think about what this means. Just err on the side of caution. Just in case I'm not imagining this, just in case this is really happening, I decided to just put a practical mindset on this and look at it from the perspective of a child ripped from their family and taken to some place where they're not allowed to speak the language they grew up learning. They're not allowed to be with their loved ones. They're not allowed to be with their siblings. They're not allowed to play with their toys. They're not allowed to wear their clothes. They're not allowed to read their stories. They're not allowed to talk their language. And they're not allowed to have anything that reminds them of who and what they have known to be since birth. Think about that from a child's perspective, I said to myself. Think about a child in that state, and then think about them lost out in the ether, in the dark somewhere, unable to hear their way home, unable to perceive where they even are. And the horrific thing is these children were murdered, and murdered through abuse, through starvation. So by the time their spirits drifted off into the spirit realm, they were already highly abused and lost already in their spirits, no doubt, if you stop and think about it on a practical level. From the level of a mother, it's so heartbreaking that I can't stand the thought of it, but I tried my best to put myself in their shoes. Under the conditions I'm facing, under the circumstances that are unfolding before my very eyes, what is it that they need from me? So I started to play Jeremy Dutcher's music. That seemed to help relieve the pressure. And then I started to realize, wait a minute, it's the music, it's the language, specifically. If I can get those children to hear his words and hear those songs, they will trust me. And when they trust me, they will follow me. And if I can get them to trust me, and I can get them to follow me, if I do this long enough, and if I stay persistent long enough, and if I do my best to get them to trust me long enough, I will be able to lead them down to that river. And I know if just one of those children see that river and hear that water and hear these words and see whatever they can see in the spirit realm, which I would not be able to perceive, but I know something went on, something would click for them in their understanding, and then maybe they would feel safe, and maybe one would lead the other, and the other would lead the next, and the next would lead the next, and the next thing you know, 200 would be found, 500 would be found, 600 would be found. And that's exactly how it played out in the real world. Just as this was playing out for me in the spirit realm, these things were unfolding in the real world, and children were being found, unearthed, their little remains brought back home to their families where they belong, to the tune of thousands. And all of this came to light right on the heels of a global pandemic, which we fail to acknowledge as being something significant, but it was much more significant than we are giving it credit for, because it slowed everything down, it stopped everything in its tracks, and made it possible for these children to find their way home from the spirit realm. If you're someone who believes in this on any level, I do not have to map it out for you of the profound nature of something like this occurring. And I'm not saying it makes me special, I'm saying it makes me willing to try. just in case I'm right, just in case it's true. Well, before it was all said and done, after I started playing Jeremy Dutcher's music, and understanding they need to hear their music, they need to hear their sounds, they need to see their traditional places of habitation so they can find their way home. And then I got thinking about the implications of that. If I hadn't have heeded this calling, what would it mean? It might have meant these children were lost forever, because I'm not the only one that agrees 2020 represented a shift in the spirit realm. And I feel that there was a metaphorical closing of a gap or a door, a portal of some kind, and the vibrational energy, some is going to be going up and some is going to be going down, and those children were stuck somewhere in the middle and did not know where they belonged. And if I had to listen to this, maybe they would have never ever found their way home in the spirit realm, let alone the physical realm. So I have to tell this story. It is really interesting to me because I've always had the equipment I need to tell this story. I've always had the information come to me just as I need it to tell this story, and even to this very moment. 7 years later, I can still tell this story just like it was yesterday. I have every tool, every device I need to tell this story. And so the Accihte Music Project is a compilation of noise compositions where I put it down on paper, so as to speak, what I was experiencing in real time in the realms of sound, so I could communicate back to people someday who might doubt me or who might not doubt me and want to know more about what I have to say. That's what the Accihte Music Project is all about. It is all about the documentation of the things I feel I can hear in the spirit realm, and the ways in which these children communicated with me, and the ways in which I tried my best to communicate back with them. And it's a much more complicated story than that, but that is what happened on a very basic level. And I don't know exactly how I can share this in any other way other than what I've done, but I've got thousands of photos where I've documented all of this. I've got writing, because I feel the ones who really will care about this, it will be a heartbreaking but hopeful thing. And I remember I showed up on my YouTube channel talking about this once, and I believe this right to this moment, that this endeavor was entirely successful, and there was not one child, not one single child was left out in some condition where they're lost. I firmly believe with every ounce of my being that every single one of them made it home because of Jeremy having the courage to scream into the piano, for having the courage to keep his language alive, and for everything that brought him to where he is, and his family, his mother, whoever's helped him. That it's all been part of this story. We are all part of this network, this chain of connection, where we were able to foster an environment where these children could escape the nightmare that they were living in the spirit realm and find their way back home to their families. And their remains found their way back home to their families. In these unmarked graves, the church did not step forward and divulge where these were. They had to be discovered. So it all played out by the people who made these discoveries, by the people who dug up the graves, by the people who made sure they got home, and by the people who are now currently taking information in and keeping record of this event and how it's affected people and what it all means for us as a country, as a nation. So I want to contribute to that narrative. As for me, I grew up feeling lost because there was nothing to anchor us as a family. But I knew my grandfather was a World War II veteran, and I knew his sacrifice was something I would not want to dishonor. So something about him and my grandfather got my attention in the spirit realm too, in a very strong way that was almost violent, but it woke me up to the stupor that I was in, to the mess my life was in, and he seemed to be the one to be communicating with me all this information. And later on down the road, I found a trapper's card that belonged to him, where it said that it didn't expire. And from what I understand, those types of things were only given out to people who were considered indigenous. So it is known that my family has indigenous heritage on some level. I'm not sure exactly what it is or how much or where exactly it stems from, but I know my grandfather's name was Caldwell, and I know he knew enough to keep our heritage hidden, because in his era, it was, when his children were small, would be the era in which they risked being removed from the home for a day, or like for the day, or permanently, as children were, because of our heritage. So I believe he hid our native heritage, and it was absolutely taboo to bring it up, which protected his children. And the reason he was firm about that is because he worked for the Anglican Church and knew what went on behind closed doors there. And he forbid his family to have anything to do with it, and he knew enough to keep his heritage hidden to protect his family. And that's great, but what it's done is left us on the outside looking in. We've never really had a connection to anywhere, and I've considered us a bit of a lost tribe, but I have found who we are, and I have made these connections because I feel my grandfather connected with me in the spirit realm in a way that was undeniable, that got my attention, on top of already being in touch with my concept of my father's persona in the spirit realm, to put it a certain way. I don't really have the language to impart this professionally per se, but I am trying. It takes a lot of courage to tell this story, and I've had a lot of pushback. I've sacrificed a lot to get to this point, but it's almost just like the story of the Red Sea. It's just like the waters parted, so I could walk through all the different things that have fallen into place so that I could tell this story, and all the different things that have happened to make it so this story is relatable and something that I can impart. I mean, it's been at times death-defying, to be honest with you. There is so much more left to the story, but I wanted to get this much down and open up channels of communication. If there's anyone interested in knowing more about this, that is something I'm willing to put time into. I feel there's a world of possibility on a creative level to tell this story, and so but I want it to be known for the people who are hurting or wondering or worried or unsure of exactly how strong and powerful the Indigenous voice is when it comes to the impact of life and death on this earth. Everything is being overshadowed by such nonsense and such garbage, but underneath it all, there's still that heartbeat rhythm that the earth itself calls out to its people. And I experienced that firsthand, and it has changed my life. And I see the whole world in a very different way, and I know the power of the earth itself and the people who love the earth. So I feel if we can get a hold of what this all actually means, it will foster a whole new way to approach life and view the world, I feel. And I want to mention lastly, before I end this part, anyway, this part one of whatever the series might end up to be, Crazy Horse predicted there would be a time that would happen that there would be a shift like this. You can call it an apocalypse or some form of Armageddon. Anyway, there was a shift in 2020, and things changed in the spirit realm, and something pretty amazing is afoot. And I will not define it, I will not put words to it, but those who have their ears and eyes open, and their hearts especially, will understand what I mean, and just hope it emboldens people to have courage and strength to stand your ground of who you are, and love your family if you can, and do not forget the sacrifice of your ancestors. It means so much. And so that is the origins of the Accihte Music Project. It exists in the form of 7 albums altogether, and some are available, some are not, but I have all that information compiled, and I'm just trying to figure out a way to get it out there in a way that's meaningful for folks who want to hear it and listen to it, but also for myself, because it has been a very, very intense journey that I want to make sure I give it justice to tell it right. So thank you for tuning in. I'm sure I'll have more to say, but this is part one of the story of the origins of the Accihte Music Project. And I didn't say this at first, but I should now. Accihte means turning red, or something to that effect. Sort of like when leaves go from green to red. That's what Accihte means, turning red. And I'll talk about where that all comes from at some point as well. But this is part one, and I'm going to end it here. Thank you very much for tuning in. Much love and peace.